Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Permission Granted, where by the end of this conversation, we're hoping to grant you permission to let relationships end that no longer serve you. Now, before we get into the whole conversation around permission to let relationships end, let's first define what we mean by relationships. A lot of people hear the word relationship and automatically think romantic, right? Like husband, wife, spouse, whatever that connection is. But relationships actually impact everywhere that we show up. So we have platonic relationships, like with friends. We have relationships with our family and the roles we play there, mothers, daughters, cousins, sisters. And then we also have professional relationships where we go to work, where we go to church, where we volunteer and donate our time. So when we talk about this conversation around letting relationships end, I want you to think about it from the perspective of any type of relationship that you may be in that is no longer serving you. I won't say how to recognize it because most of the time we all know when something is no longer serving us. We're just more comfortable holding on to it, or we want to give it the benefit of the doubt for some reason. But the signs are usually pretty obvious and we just don't want to go down that path for some reason. So we're going to talk through that. And then the other thing, just a tool that I use to assess relationships and kind of come to peace with whether or not they're ending or what I should do to fight for them. And this is a fairly well known colloquialism. People are in your life for either a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Reason meaning they're serving a very specific purpose. Could be to just teach you something about yourself or expose you to something that you haven't seen before or done before. Season is a period of time. Maybe you have a connection that comes up during a divorce or something traumatic, or honestly, even something positive to help you figure out how to capitalize on it and push you to the next level. And then there are your lifetime relationships where those are people who, those are your ride or dies. They're going to rock with you up, down, and you're going to know a lifetimer because they're going to consistently feel safe and consistently feel trusted. And they're going to work with you through your difficulties. And it's going to be symbiotic, meaning you're pouring into each other at the same levels. And even when either one of you are having a difficult time or even having a difficult time with one another, you're still working through that in a healthy way, not in a unhealthy way. So lifetime relationships are ones that, it's a longer commitment and a lot of work, but it's always worth the payout because it's a safe space to go to. So now that we have kind of those parameters set, let's get into it. So let's talk about why do we hold on in my experience. And here's my opening disclaimer: not a therapist, not a coach, just a person who has been fortunate enough to do some healing in my own life work and gifted to use the transparency of my stories to help people decide if they want to go down the same journey and get their own healing and get their own peace. I have accomplished having some peace in my life. And so I want to share the things with you guys that have worked for me. So let's get into it. First of all, why? Like, why is it so hard to let go sometimes? And we got a lot of reasons for that, right? So let's say we think about a romantic relationship. So I can even talk about mine, right? I knew that my first marriage was going to end in year 2. We were having a conversation in the car on the way home from a place. I remember the car. I remember where we were when that realization hit me. I remember the conscious decision to smush it down and act like I didn't hear that. And why? Because that was my marriage. We had children and I would have been giving up and quitting. But I knew then that we weren't going to be a fit. So I held on because of guilt and honestly, maybe even gaslighting myself, saying, that I just needed to stick it out because that's the messaging that we hear a lot of times. Sometimes you hold on, let's think about a job, right? Well, sometimes it's difficult to have a job, or sometimes your job works and the situation you're in, it serves the purpose that it needs to serve for that. Like maybe you have flexibility to go pick up your kids, or maybe you just emotionally or psychologically aren't ready to change. So you decide to hold on to an atmosphere that you know is not ultimately going to be what you need. However, you're making a choice at that time to keep that in place. So those are some of the reasons, or even like your church. Don't get me started. Churches, volunteer organizations, there could be some guilt. Like sometimes we just hold on to things out of guilt, out of fear of the unknown. And all of those are valid reasons. Sometimes we're aware and sometimes we're not. Sometimes they become tools that we use to convince ourselves, we give ourselves meaning behind something that, at the end of the day is really not adding value back to you. But at the end of the day, you always know, when something is not good for you, when something or someone is not pouring back to you in the same levels that you're pouring out to them. We always know when someone is impacting us in a negative way. A lot of the times where I've seen when somebody's being impacted in a negative way, where I've seen responses, it's been a strong fight response to it or justification of why somebody is right versus somebody is wrong. And it always just looks like a lot of fighting or a lot of preparing to fight versus just letting it go and having your peace. Sometimes we hold on to it because it's familiar. It's what we know. I have somebody in my life who, for a really long time, would stay in these really chaotic cycles. And it was like when something calmed down, I would watch them. And I actually used to do the same thing. If something calmed down, because I was always used to feeling a chaotic energy inside, or having some sort of chaos make me be emotionally triggered until I did my work and realized that I always knew I hated that feeling, but that feeling was familiar and I didn't know how to exist without feeling any other way. And so even when something would calm down or peacefully resolve, I would go and seek out something else because I was used to having the emotional battle or the emotional feeling or the weight of something. I sought it out because it was familiar without even realizing that I was undoing myself. And then I was not happy about it. And I was complaining and I was self made martyr. It's just all these things. And a lot of it was my choice because I wasn't honoring the truth that I knew that there were just some things that just really did not have a place in my life. And it was easier for me to hang on to that than it was to let it go because I knew how to be in chaos. I did not know how to be in peace. So once I realized that, like, I was really the one doing this to myself, I got to make a choice about whether or not I wanted to do the work to undo that. And that is exactly what I did. When I did that, I cannot tell you how much. As a matter of fact, that's why we have the production of the book. The release of the book It's Not Me, It's You, Take Their Labels Off. Because I decided that I was going to allow peace to become my familiar ground. And I made conscious choices to live from a peaceful place. So when I made the decision to choose peace, to understand myself enough to know my patterns and why I might have been seeking out things or holding on to things, then I was able to, I didn't consciously only add peaceful relationships to me, but what I did do was I stopped adding any relationships at all until I could get myself together and gave myself like a 5-year window. Honestly, it was like a 5-year window for me to just sit down, be still, analyze myself, analyze how I was connecting to people, and determine whether or not something was going to be a symbiotic relationship where it poured back and forth into me. So the relief, though, that came from that, I was lighter. I am more peaceful, far more comfortable in my own skin, far more comfortable being alone. I love my own company. I crack myself up. And the other thing is that I'm very protective of that now, and I'm okay being protective of that because I don't want the unhappiness to be triggered within me, and especially by a choice that I'm making or something that I'm choosing to keep around. So that's what comes with letting it go. But the other side of what comes with letting it go is grief and fear because, well, grief because you're sad, right? A lot of times when we get into these relationships that we like misappropriate a title to, like something is just for a reason or something is for a season, but you give it a lifetime title. It's sad when you realize that you have to let it go, especially if it's like a longtime friend or a longtime church relationship. I have personally had violations from my employers where I really thought that I could get in a place and just kind of stay there and just do my thing and have somebody make it very uncomfortable for me. That is very sad. And it's sad, it's disappointing because a lot of times people are just looking for a place to rest. And so if this relationship is my place to rest, if this job is my place to rest, if this volunteer opportunity is my place to rest, and that gets disturbed, well, number one, I'm sad because I thought you were something that you are not. And then number two, I'm nerve wracked because I have put you in a spot in my life and you have become some sort of pillar or something for me to rely on and you have moved and that is destabilizing for me. So that is unnerving. And then I'm scared because what do I do to replace that? Do I do anything to replace it? Am I strong enough to replace it on my own and for myself? Do I even want to have that conversation to find out? Do I even want to do the work to find out? Sometimes people want to do the work to find out and become, become immovable within their own right and their own space. And sometimes it's a bigger lift that people want to take on. And so that's how they end up staying. So one side of doing the work is, very relieving, especially if you want to take your power back. I am a person who appreciates being in power and empowered about myself. Some people might call that agency. I definitely have agency and enjoy agency, even if from the outside, some of the choices that I'm making in a way that might look detrimental. But for me, as long as I'm making a choice that is detrimental up front, but there's a payoff on the back end that's strategic, that's agency versus being forced into a place and just reacting out of fear or emotion. So, two sides to that coin when you decide to let it go. When you decide to let it go, if you decide to let it go, there's an enormous amount of courage required because you're daring to trust that you can create something outside of this thing that you've anchored yourself to. The older I get and the more I prove myself to myself, the more safe I feel with myself. So for me personally, I will bet on myself and take a courageous risk to remove something from my life that doesn't fit every single day and twice on Sundays. That's not everybody's story, but that is something that is available to you depending on where you want to find your safety. I am a person who prefers to not have to depend or rely on something outside of me to give me the validation that I need because people are living their own lives too. Organizations are made up of people. When their priorities change, if you are not top of mind when those people, places, and things decide to go in a different direction for themselves, you become a casualty of their decision. That is a powerless place to be in from my perspective, at least unconsciously, if you're not aware of it. And I just don't prefer to, I prefer to have be in front of things that are impacting me as much as possible without necessarily being controlling. I think that sounds a little controlling now that I say it. But what I've learned is to put boundaries around the relationships that I enter and guardrails up for me and for them from me. I'm clear on expectations. And I think that's an amazing thing because it minimizes the risk that I'm going to attach myself to something that doesn't care for me the same way that I care for it. And what becomes possible when you do that is life on your terms. Many times we have these sayings that are good on a shirt, good on a mug. I have a shirt in my room right now that says, create the life that you want. Creating a life that you want, though, comes with sacrifice. When something comes in that doesn't fit, it comes with boundaries that makes both you and the people that you are establishing them with uncomfortable. It requires an ethic and diligence around protecting those two things and being consistent in how you apply it. It doesn't, and it won't, right? If it's going to last and it be healthy, it's not going to be an overnight thing. I think I hear people say, not I think, I know, I hear people say many times that if something doesn't serve me, I just cut it off. I don't believe that just cutting a person off or cutting something off, especially if they're one of those potential lifetime relationships, I don't believe that just cutting them off is necessarily healthy. I believe it avoids accountability, but I do believe you can go through a process and work through as a mature adult where adult and member organizations, people, places, and things, they're all made up of people. So you have to be in relationship with people, even to be in relationship with organizations. But when you can be mature and set your boundaries, allow them to set their boundaries, it becomes like a dance. And where sometimes you give more, like, if it's 100%, sometimes you give 60, 70, they give 40, 30. Sometimes they give 60, 70, and you give, 40, 30. But that's symbiosis, right? And so all that to say, it's not an overnight process, but peace becomes available without sacrificing any of the relationships of the people behind you or around you that are important to you, or the volunteer or the work relationships. Those things all become able to maintain. You create capacity to take on more should you choose to, when you remove things that don't serve you, healthily assess what does serve you, and work with the people within those parameters to create, relationships that are beneficial for everybody. So hopefully after listening to this, you understand. You now have permission. Well, actually, you didn't need me to give it to you, but sometimes people just need to hear somebody say it. You now have permission to release what no longer serves you, or a roadmap or some insight. I'll say that you now have insight into what it could feel like when you consciously decide to let relationships end that no longer serves you. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me on these solo pods, listening in. I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, give us feedback on Apple Podcasts. If you don't have your copy of my book, It's Not Me, It's You, Take Their Labels Off, and this is something that is interesting to you, I highly recommend you get it. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, everywhere, every major outlet where books are sold. And order your copy of these types of topics. If you enjoy hearing them, the book goes into many more at a deeper level, and it's much more expansive. So thank you so much for listening in. Be on the listen. Season 2 of the podcast will be releasing at the end of August. But in the meantime, we'll keep up these intermittent chats, granting you permission on specific topics. If you have something that you want to hear about, send us a note. info@labelsbegone.com. Drop it in the comments, wherever you hear your pods. But we'd love to hear from you and know about what you want to hear about too. Alrighty, until next time.